Welcome in to Texans Today, everybody. I am your host, Jeremy Chuggs, and coming up on today's show, a little free agency breakdown, some flashy players the Texans could sign, maybe spend a little bit of that cash, or maybe some under-the-radar, some cheaper options for the Texans as we get closer and closer to the new league year. Reminder, next week, free agency starts, so we are just a week away from all the madness, and if you want the Texans to be aggressive this year, this offseason, if you want Nick Caserio and DeMeco Ryans to get things going and get ourselves a contender in Houston for this season, go down and hit that thumbs up icon. Like today's video because I, for one, want them to continue to be aggressive, continue to build off this past year, and continue to dominate the AFC South. If you agree with me, go down and hit that thumbs up icon. Now, this whole video kind of sparked from ESPN releasing an article earlier this week, and they linked Drew Dalman, the Falcons free agent center, to the Houston Texans, saying it would be a perfect fit in free agency. Now, the problem with that is the price for some of these guys on the offensive line in free agency is going up because Trey Smith of the Kansas City Chiefs was franchise tagged. And now it begs the question, could the Texans spend big on Dalman or somebody else in free agency? And I do have to say ESPN laid out some pretty compelling arguments on why the Texans should go ahead and sign Dalman. Here is 2024 PFF grades, all respectable. 78.8 overall, pass blocking grade of, that's scary, 66.6, a run blocking grade of 79.8, 2 sacks allowed, 3 penalties on the year, only 7 hurries and 1 hit on the quarterback, which is impressive, being that he had a statue in Kirk Cousins behind him for half of the season this past year. But this is exactly what ESPN had to say on why the Texans should go out and sign Dalman. Dalman would stabilize the middle of that line and will turn 27 next season. He started only 9 games this past season because of an ankle injury, but had a 95.1% pass block win rate when healthy. In 2023, his 94.0 pass block win rate was fantastic. Dalman also fits a Houston running game that uses a lot of outside zone. No offense ran more outside zone than Atlanta this past season. So he's a fit with the Houston Texans. He's young. He's played well. The only problem is the latest PFF projection around Dalman actually increased after Trey Smith got tagged by the Kansas City Chiefs. It was at around $10, $11 million a year. Now they're projecting that Dalman gets a contract that is worth around $14 million per year, depending on however long he signs with a team. Now, Dalman is really good, but for the Texans to give up $14 million a year to a free agent center, I don't know if I'm there yet. I mean, Trey Smith was one thing, him being the best interior offensive lineman to hit free agency this past year, but now that he's off the market, do you spend a little bit more to get the next guy? In my opinion, I wouldn't do so. And looking at PFF's projections for their contracts, here are just a couple of cheaper offensive line options, and obviously, these are just projections. It could be a lot more or a lot less for some of these guys, but they had James Daniels at $5.5 million a year. This still is one of my favorite targets for the Houston Texans. He's still young. Now, he's coming off a really bad, I believe, an Achilles injury that kept him out for almost the entire year this past season. But at $5.5 million a year, he is a really good option for the Texans if his medicals check out. Kevin Zeitler, a little bit older from the Lions, coming in at about $6.25 million a year. Patrick Mekari, around 27 years old for the Baltimore Ravens, has played everywhere along the offensive line. He's coming in around $8.68 million a year. That's because he also plays a lot of tackle. So I think that projection is of him being a team's right tackle signing in free agency. You also have Aaron Banks, the guard from the San Francisco 49ers, coming in at around $8.5 million a year, even though I think that is going to be a lot higher. I think it's going to be closer to around 11 or 12 million. Banks, really young, has played well with the 49ers. I think would be a good fit with the Houston Texans as well, but I do think that price is a little bit higher than what PFF is projecting it to be. And then Ryan Kelly, the center for the Indianapolis Colts, projected at $9.5 million a year. I actually think maybe a little bit less for Kelly. He's getting up there in age a little bit, but all these cheaper options than Drew Dalman in free agency. My question to you, though, is we've been talking O-line a ton. Obviously, Texans fans want, the franchise to fix the O-line, sign an offensive lineman. But is that the first move that they'll make? This next position group might be the first move that they make. But let me know, if you had to predict it right now, what position do you think the Texans will address first this offseason? Do you think it's O-line? Maybe wide receiver? Maybe something on the defensive side of the football? Go down and let me know if you get hit with the YouTube ad break here. Perfect timing. Scroll on down and give me your prediction. What's the first position the Texans address this offseason? Maybe they could go out and bring back Stefon Diggs. This has been a popular option for a lot of Texans fans. Recently this week, T. Higgins off the market with a franchise tag. He did not seem too thrilled with that. Literally just tweeting out tag after it happened. Diggs, even though he's 31 years old, could be the top wide receiver option in free agency now that T. Higgins is off the board. Begs the question, would he return to the Texans on a team-friendly deal, or is he willing to or looking to cash in this offseason with another team that needs a wide receiver? Obviously, we all know Stefon Diggs got hurt midseason, only played 8 games for the Texans, but was on track to get around 1,000 yards, 6 touchdowns, almost 100 grabs for the Texans. He was, that wide receiver 1B / wide receiver 2 for the Texans while he was playing for this team. I thought he had really good chemistry with C.J. Stroud. The only hiccup with this is that Diggs' projection is around $16 million a year right now per PFF. I don't know if the Texans are willing to give him that sort of money. If he's willing to come down just a little bit, help us out, maybe that could work. But if the Texans aren't able to get a deal with Diggs, if he's truly trying to cash in one last time during his NFL career, which I can't blame him. He's on the wrong side of 30. This might be his last chance to cash in free agency. If he wants to go out and go to the highest bidder, that's his prerogative. But I do hope that somehow the Texans are able to work a deal with Diggs to bring him back to Houston. If not, here's some cheaper options that a lot of Texans fans have been talking about. I've seen a lot of people in my comments talking about Hollywood Brown, Marquise Brown from the Kansas City Chiefs. His projection right now is around $9 million a year. One of my favorite options. And before the Texans-Chargers playoff game, I said Joshua Palmer being out will be huge for the Chargers because he is one of their best receiving weapons. He's a free agent this offseason, projection around $6.5 million a year. I really like the idea of Josh Palmer. If they're able to get him at that price tag at $6.5 million, yeah, sign me up if I'm the Houston Texans to get Josh Palmer in the door. And Elijah Moore, $4.4 million per year. His projection hasn't had a lot of production, but you look at a guy like Elijah Moore, he has not once in his entire NFL career been put in a position to succeed. He was with the New York Jets whenever they were trash, and then he got traded, or I don't remember if he got traded, but he moved to the Cleveland Browns, and they have not been good since he's been there with Deshaun Watson, right? Like, Deshaun Watson's been bad and been injured. So Elijah Moore, still really young. I believe he's like 25, 26 years old, has a ton of potential, just has never been in an opportunity to succeed. Maybe you get him at a really cheap deal. He's able to prove himself in Houston, and he's able to use some of those attributes that made him an early round pick early in his career. Now, I have some more free agency options for the Texans coming up in just a moment, but I couldn't do today's show if it wasn't for our sponsor over at Factor. Factor Meals will get you fed, and we'll make sure it's done efficiently so you never have to go to bed hungry. Factor is ready to optimize your nutrition this year. Factor has chef-made gourmet meals that make eating well easy. They're dietitian approved and ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes. So you can fuel right and feel great no matter what life throws at you. Factor arrives fresh and fully prepared, perfect for any active, busy lifestyle with 40 options across 8 dietary preferences on the menu each week. It's easy to pick meals tailored to your goals. Choose from preferences like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, or Keto. Factor can help you feel your best all day long with wholesome smoothies, breakfast, grab-and-go snacks, and more add-ons just like that. Reach your goals this year with ingredients you can trust and convenience that can't be beat. Eat smart with Factor. Get started today at factormeals.com/factorpodcast and use code FACTORPODCAST to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code FACTORPODCAST at factormeals.com/factorpodcast to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. Shout out to Factor Meals. I love it. I know you'll love it if you're looking for a really easy, simple way to have your meals ready for you during the week. Factor has you covered. Next, let's look at another free agency target that has some ties to the Houston Texans. Talanoa Hufanga played for DeMeco Ryans in San Francisco while he was a DC there. He's coming off injury, only played 308 snaps in 2024. Could the Texans look to solidify the secondary and bring Hufanga back to DeMeco Ryans? Now, he had two of his best seasons in the NFL with DeMeco Ryans. His best season by far was in 2022 whenever DeMeco Ryans was the defensive coordinator in San Francisco. Has kind of had a little bit of a decline in 2024. Obviously only played 7 games, so got injured. But PFF projects him at $12.5 million a year. Now, at that price tag, I don't think it's worth it for the Houston Texans. Your secondary is already really good and stacked, and you have other guys you have to pay. Derek Stingley to make sure that he's here during the long term. But if this number is incorrect, if it's on the underside of $10 million, maybe we're talking. Maybe we're getting somewhere. The only thing that's going to be a little bit of a hang-up for me with going out and getting Talanoa Hufanga for the Houston Texans is I think there's better, cheaper options out there than Hufanga. So if it's at 12.5, anywhere near that, no, I'm good, because PFF is projecting Justin Simmons, who I think right now, you're talking about the future. Obviously, you want Hufanga, but right now, one season, yeah, give me Justin Simmons at $6 million a year. I really like the idea of looking at a guy like Elijah Molden at $4.5 million a year from the Chargers, or you could go with the safe route and just re-sign Eric Murray at $1.5 million a year. Maybe it's not that cheap, but it won't be an extremely expensive contract if you're looking to bring back Murray. I know the jury's still out and Texans fans are somewhat split on how Murray played this past season, but as a cheap option to kind of shore up the secondary, I would not hate that whatsoever. Let's look at another Texans target. Now on the interior of the defensive line, Levi Onwuzurike from the Detroit Lions. Wow, that is say that 5 times fast. He got injured this past season with the Detroit Lions. He's a good 3-tech/pass rusher from the interior. Now, the Lions have already re-signed McNeil, their other interior defensive lineman, to a large contract, so I don't really see them going out and re-signing Levi. He could, really turn this Texans strength into a monster strength. And after watching the Super Bowl, what the Philadelphia Eagles did to the Kansas City Chiefs, maybe the Texans are like, you know what? Let's just stack up our defensive line as insane as we possibly can and get a guy like Levi at $8.25 million a year. I wouldn't absolutely love this idea, though, because I think one of the biggest strengths that the Texans have had their first 2 years under DeMeco Ryans is he's been able to find gems on the defensive side of the football for very cheap. So if it's me, I'm looking at that $8.25 million a year price tag. Like, why not go out and just re-sign a guy like Mario Edwards Jr., who's being projected right now at $1.5 million a year. A Foley Fatukasi, who's being projected at around $3.9 million a year. Or even Puna Ford, who's being projected at $3.5 million a year. All those options, I think, are more tantalizing than somebody who's over $8 million a year at a position of strength. Another guy who I want to look at, and these are some more, back-end cheap options that I want to look at that have some sort of ties to the Houston Texans. First, let's look at Dre Greenlaw, linebacker for the San Francisco 49ers. Obviously has had some tough injury history, right? Like in Super Bowl, not last year, or not this past year, but the year before, whenever the 49ers were in the Super Bowl, tore his Achilles while walking onto the field for the first play. I mean, absolutely heartbreaking stuff there from Dre Greenlaw, but was able to come back towards the end of this past season. And there's reports that the 49ers have put out a deal for Dre Greenlaw, a 1 year, around like $9-10 million with incentives prove it deal. Maybe Dre Greenlaw wants to reunite with DeMeco Ryans as well. We saw Azeez Al-Shire really excited to come back to Houston and, reunite with DeMeco. Maybe the same thing with Dre Greenlaw. We can have kind of that linebacking group that DeMeco was coaching for San Francisco, but just in Houston. Just a sneaky name to look out for, Dre Greenlaw. If you're the Houston Texans, you're always looking for those connections. Somebody who was on the team this past year who I think would be a decent re-sign option, Derek Barnett, who's actually sneaky young. He's 28 years old. This past year had 5 sacks, 2 touchdowns on 2 fumble returns. His projection is around $4.25 million a year. I thought he was a really good rotational pass rusher for the Houston Texans. If they're able to get him back on a semi-cheap deal, I wouldn't mind that whatsoever as well, to get some, depth behind a Will Anderson Jr., behind a Danielle Hunter for that defensive line. And somebody that I just wanted to look at, because we all talk about the draft and the running backs in the draft, as we should, because the running back class this year is insane. But maybe take a flyer on a guy like Nick Chubb. I mean, dude was a top 5 back in the league when healthy. Obviously had that gruesome injury, came back this season, only had 102 carries, 332 yards, 3 touchdowns, but that was also on a really bad Cleveland Browns team. I wouldn't mind taking a flyer on Nick Chubb at a 1-year, $3 million a year, have him paired with Joe Mixon. If he's able to get some semblance back of what he was in Cleveland before, yeah, I'm okay with that. Looking at a guy like Nick Chubb, obviously, might be easier to just draft somebody in the 4th or 5th round of this year's draft. But if he's not signed after the draft and you're not able to get a running back that you want in this year's draft, you have to fill other needs. Maybe Nick Chubb could be a tantalizing option to fill that need after the draft. And another one that I want to take a look at is Nate Hobbs. He was projected by PFF to get $4 million a year. The Texans are already set on their outside corners, but Hobbs, his entire career, has played his best ball as a slot nickel corner. I think that could fit with what the Texans need, right? They could need some help in that slot corner route. He's also able to play outside, so he gives you some positional flexibility. And I think the Texans must address that secondary depth this season. They tried to fill it last year with some, project guys like a Jeff Okudah, like a CJ Henderson. None of those guys worked out at the end of the day. They were all, kind of washed. Maybe you bring in a guy like Nate Hobbs at a $4 million, maybe $5 million a year price tag and help your secondary depth and help, especially with guys like Kamari last year who missed some time this past year. He was really good, but you need some depth behind him and Stingley in the secondary if you want to go on a late playoff run this year. Now, that's all I have for you on today's video, folks. If you liked what you saw, maybe you didn't like what you saw, go ahead, hit me up on Twitter at Jeremy Chuggs. My DMs are always open, always down to talk some Texans ball.